for joining us. I hope that we can have some interesting discussions about the topic that seems to be very important and connecting also many of the other topics, because those are issues that do concern the people that we label, or they themselves label, as the so-called middle class, a section that historically had been very much connected with the center-right parties and with the EPP group. I'm very happy to welcome here our keynote speaker, which is Ludek Niedermayer, MEP for TOPAZ, and Miriam Lexmann, that is a former director of IRI Europe, and also MEP-elect. If you're not sure what that means, she can explain that to you later. It's a very complicated case. And also Arjen Siegmann, that is an economist and an analyst, and he also reviewed our publication that we also have the pleasure to give you here as a complimentary copy. I'm going to very, very briefly introduce what is really in the book and why we are giving it to you. It's just been published, and we decided to look at the case of the middle class in the case of the Czech Republic from a political, economic, and sociological perspectives, because we thought that it's not just the economic aspect that is important, but it has implications in the social and in the political arenas as well. And then we also did a European perspective, given also that Mater Center done some comparative work on the middle class in different member states. That was actually under the work of Arjen Siegmann. We discussed before, and that's been on for quite some time, that it's very complicated to talk about the middle class as one group of people, and that it is far more complicated than that. And maybe the problems of the center-right parties addressing middle-class voters is connected with this misunderstanding who really is the middle class. So we did a survey with the support of Konrad Stiftung and Martin Center this spring in March. Among 1,027 respondents, the methodology of the survey you find in the publication, also in the annexes at the end, specifying how we did the survey. And then we asked political scientists, economists, and sociologists to interpret the survey and give us some insight that could be not only theoretical for the academic world, but could actually be also practically used in the work of the center-right parties trying to better capture the interests and the concerns of the middle class. If you have any questions about the survey, please feel free to ask me, but given that we do not have the authors of the survey here with us today, I would like to rather talk about the implications of what we found, so that you don't feel disconnected by not reading the publication. The speakers have read it, so they do know what's in it, but we will make it in a way that we all can understand. Read it as the middle class then was divided into two parts of segmentations based on attitudes to political processes. They trust in political institutions, if they vote, how they follow the media, etc. And then the status segmentation, which is based on economic capital, social capital, and cultural capital. Again, the methodology is described in the publication. So we came up with several segmentations, and then we also combine them together to see how that combines into the better understanding of middle class. If you have any more details, questions about the details of the survey, feel free to ask me anytime. After our debate, I will be very happy to answer your questions. I will now ask Mr. Niedermayer for his kick-off speech.
So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a very interesting topic. And I don't want to pretend that I'm expert in this, so I came here also to learn a lot. I understand, and I can see it also in the study provided, that the issue of middle class has many dimensions. There is political, social dimension, there is a culture, there is economic dimension. But speaking as someone who is in the parliament representing center-right, probably the most importantly, it should be the electorate that should vote for us. And this is important thing in the politics, and we should understand better. I guess even the publication shows that it's not so easy. And even what shows it even more are the election results, because sometimes you just believe that you are addressing some electorate and electorate is not there. And then this is a serious problem. So let me here address at least two dimensions of the middle class that I can provide you with some insight, but I'm very much looking forward for the discussion. The first one is political. And in my view, middle class is not just a group of people that should have some kind of tendency to support the center-right parties, but it's something much more. I guess this should be the relatively big, relatively stable group of people that is showing stronger signs of ownership of the society, that they feel that the society as we have now is to some extent theirs. And I guess this is for me very important factor, especially now when all the world is changing. I guess not only in new EU countries, but everywhere we are now lacking a significant proportion of people in the society that would really firmly stay behind our concept of society. So concept based on the freedom, based on the liberal democracy, based on the respect to fundamental values, rule of law, and so on. And people that, if the party that they vote for somehow made a mistake and they lost trust, they lose trust to this party, they will not go to extremists on left or right. They will not reject this concept of society, but they will just look for someone who will better represent it. And I guess this would be very important to have quite a big amount of people in the society with this kind of attitude, because this will be some kind of stabilizer from the point of view of direction, from the point of values that will be important for the society. Here, if I can quote, I guess, table 3 of your research, the figure is not very encouraging, because the biggest proportion, when you make kind of smart sorting of the society, the biggest proportion is called ambivalent, that maybe one can translate to the voting pattern. That would mean that once you vote for left, the next time you vote for right, then you maybe go for liberals, and then you end up with voting for someone who will be authoritarian. So this is not for me a very good sign, and it would be good to have really broader part of the society that will have kind of clear vision. That doesn't mean that they will always vote for the same, but they will respect and they will stay behind the values, especially in case of my country that we introduced 30 years ago and that I believe are still very, very important. The second concept is for me the economic one, because I feel, being a mathematician, I still feel a little bit like an economist. And obviously, whenever you talk about wealth, about perception of wealth, you are talking about some kind of a relative concept. I have just read that, for example, Czech Republic has got over the Spain in terms of GDP per capita in PPP. You know, no celebration in Czech Republic. You know, who would ever dream 30 years ago that we will be not only better than Greece and other countries, but also doing better than Spain. So it's a relative concept. But if I look at the situation of the middle class, just consider two factors. First of all, we are building social market economy, and probably, as all of you know, this is not a socialistic concept. This is actually a concept of EPP and centre-right parties. Building the social market economy when the country is reasonably rich means supporting those who are in needs. Support them smart way, but definitely support them so that they find a place in the society and they have fair chance to participate. So that means help them. Okay, so this is one part of the society. If I'm the middle class, so this is looking down, so okay, I understand that this is something that is important. And now I look above me, and I can see very rich people that actually in 21st century are, in most cases, getting richer and richer. And they are, because they are all smart or because the system is favorable for them, they are able to consume bigger part of the resources than would be the weight in the economy. So I'll now add 1 plus 1 together. So we will see, okay, we are helping the weaker, richer are smart enough so they consume more, and I'm the guy who is paying the bill. And this is not very good. And I guess this is what makes people that believe that they are in the part of the mid-society, what makes them a little bit frustrating. So I don't have any response to that, but it's a serious issue, because this is also creating some kind of feeling of unfairness, and this unfairness can hardly build this strong association with the society that I was talking about at the beginning. So I would not underestimate this economic problem, despite of the fact that life is by far not only about the economy. So what are the solutions? Obviously, traditional one is to make a social system smart enough, to be really efficient, not cut the support of those that are less lucky, disadvantaged, but make it smart way that you are not wasting money for basically cost of providing, but rather focus on really delivering the result. This is one thing. The second thing that would help, and I guess this is strong EPP agenda, is to make economy better. If economy is better, everyone has the benefit. And to make economy really better, stable and sustainable means that living standard of the middle class will keep improving, and they will get more trust into the economy. That very important feeling of ownership can be created much better. But last not least, there is some issue that is sometimes difficult for central-right parties, and I guess we should not underestimate and overlook the bias that current system has towards the richest. Especially tax system, but also many systems of regulation, are set up the way that they grant the people with very high income ability to really increase the income and to have lower, and I would say unfair share on paying the costs of the society. And this is sometimes the problem of center-right, and obviously more right you go, it's even better parties, to admit that this is the issue. And I guess this is the issue, and this is a serious issue that is undermining sustainability and trust of the people to the economy. I'm not calling for any kind of revolution, because you can really do step-by-step reasonable measures, but we should talk about it. And probably we should also understand that some kind of fundamental base that was used for century is not in 21st century presented. And just to very simply explain that, I believe that currently the prosperity of the economy is much more based on, let's say, flexibility, innovation, and functioning financial services than on the accumulation of capital. Because traditional people believe that what is very important will allow accumulation of the capital, and accumulation of the capital at the end of the day will assure the prosperity, assure the jobs, and assure the development. I guess now it's not true. It's more about the flexibility, about willingness to people to take the risk, and the capital is more often provided by the financial service. And if we open this debate, then obviously we can end up with different setup of the tax system and so on, and maybe end up in something that will gradually reduce that bias towards the riches. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are right away a few things that definitely I would like to come back to a little bit later. Can I ask you, Miriam, for your introduction?
Yes, thank you very much. I will continue in what Ludek has opened up and maybe speak a little bit in kind of headlines, because I want to throw lots of issues into the debate so we can maybe come back later to some of the details. And I will start with a story where I remember that in the 90s, when I started to travel as coming from an ex-communist country, Slovakia, I couldn't afford anything, not even mineral water to buy, because that would be the price of a, I don't know, salary of 5 days of my father. But I was kind of watching the shops, the tailored shops, and I saw in the 90s a huge difference where I kind of, from the beginning, I saw this classical style clothes for the middle class, and the same retailers in 10, 15 years later were offering products which I think suited the taste of young Russian daughter of a millionaire who studies in the West, and this kind of society. And I know that maybe this example looks weird to you, but I think what I saw then is like, where is the purchasing power of the middle class? They do not have anymore the purchasing power to buy the products of the retailers they had for, I don't know, 80 years. And that showed something which we didn't really pay attention to, but that actually clearly shows that the middle class has diminished. Although the middle class, as Ludek said very clearly, is the stable part of the society which always voted for the parties which are pro-democratic, pro-freedom, which actually is the stable pillar of democracy in our society. And so that's a kind of the first impression. The second thing is, which has to be highlighted in terms of Europe, is the middle class is in post-communist countries, where the people who used to be the middle class, they never really made it back to the middle class. Maybe, yes, in the cultural capital in terms of education, but who really became the middle class and jumped quickly to the elites were those who profited from the 90s, which most of them were related to the communist regime. So they had access to capital, they had access to money, they had access to international trade in the falling Soviet Union, where they actually made their fortune. And this is our upper middle class and elites in our society at the moment. And those who have the educational, cultural background are still struggling in the system, because doctors, teachers still have very low salaries, which is the kind of classical job for the middle class. So this is something we need to look into as well, where we are failing as central-right parties in our own countries. What also happened, and that happened in, I think, across the West, meaning also the Central Eastern Europe, but also in the US, is that the social system, and in the US is a different reason, but that was the healthcare, but in Europe, the social system started to be failing because of the falling of the birth rates. So someone had to pay the social system. And who is the easiest to squeeze is the middle class, because the upper class, as Ludek said, they pay taxes in tax havens, so they don't even pay tax, but they have enormous impact on policymakers because of the image. I remember when Zuckerberg was in the European Parliament, I couldn't believe my eyes, because the members of the European Parliament, instead, Ludek, and I'm not talking about you, you are not there, instead of dealing with the big issue, how social media are actually undermining democracy, were taking the opportunity of a photo with Zuckerberg. That was the main purpose of most of the policymakers. And it kind of shows so clearly that these elites, especially the tech companies, have enormous impact on politics, but they contribute nearly nothing into the economy because they don't pay taxes. Either they have assumptions of paying taxes because of the governments give it to them, or they don't pay taxes because they avoid it through tax havens. And these are the issues which somehow, what I see is that we as a central right, we were overlooking it because we thought that the big tech companies are on our side somehow because they are businesses. And it looks like businesses were always central right, were always somehow our allies. But looking at the whole thing now, it looks like this is actually the enemies of the system, because that has deprived our electorate to be faithful to our policymakers and to our parties, because they no longer trust us, because we were unable to deliver what they expect to be delivered if they are those who finance the whole system, that they are treated as such. And there are a lot of policies we can maybe come, I mean, my party, the Christian Democrats from Slovakia, we have certain ideas now how to maybe make the social system just, what Ludek also suggested. But this is an area where we really have to look into. And there are two other areas I just briefly mentioned, is the pressure from ecology, and where we, again, the states are, in terms of Be Greener, are giving lots of subsidies to big tech companies or big companies, but the middle class and small and medium-sized businesses, again, they have to pay in order to keep the pressure to be more ecological, but there is very little help to them to be ecological, because the help goes again to the big top companies. And the final thing is, in this context, we need to pay attention to is the media. And actually in the book, I looked at, you were looking into the way the media behavior, but it was more about who is interested in news and who is not, and how they read news, where they get their news. But what I think is more important also is to look into the media preferences in terms of real media outlets. Because what comes from IRI research, but we didn't have it, we didn't have in our data the income part, so it's difficult to read. But this is something which I think would be for the EPP very good to capture, is what media our electorate or the middle class trusts. Because the problem is that you have the kind of main papers which are becoming more and more liberal. There was an election among the German journalists where the Green Party won. And then yet, it doesn't reflect at all the political preferences of the population. So we have papers which normally the middle class should rely on, the kind of mainstream papers, but they are becoming more and more liberal, progressive, I would even say. So that means that ideologically is incompatible with the EPP electorate. And then you have, for the working class and the kind of lower class, you have the tabloids, which again is not a real source of information. So practically our electorate in most of the EU countries has hardly any medium which would be strong and powerful and kind of opinion making they could rely to. And we see more and more people are definitely not even trusting information, like basic information, if it's proposed or kind of suggested or written by a medium which is ideologically different than the reader. So if a conservative central-right voter reads liberal paper, they tend not to even trust the facts in the paper. So we are seeing this kind of huge disparity between where the media is heading and where would we like our electorate to see, because obviously then they fall into reading different small outlets where you can find more and more disinformation. It's far easier to manipulate the electorate. So this is another issue we have to pay attention, is the kind of like media landscape when we look in the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you. And Arjen, if I can ask you.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for having me on the panel. I Googled a bit on Czech-Dutch relationships, and what I found is Richard Krajicek. Well, I knew that. So he's a tennis player. His father emigrated from Czechia in or Czechoslovakia, it was at the time, 1970. And then he became our only Dutch, so his son, the son of Petr Krajicek, Richard Krajicek, was the only Dutch Wimbledon winner that we ever had. But this is interesting, so that's a loss for Czechia and a gain for us. And I think this is an example of then I'd like to hear what others think about that, of middle class prosperity, or how it's different per country. Like for the Netherlands, I think the European Union has just been great. Czechia does not have the euro, isn't it? Yeah. But the European Union is great for us, but for some countries it's not. I think if you look at the southern countries, maybe Italy, Spain, or Greece, you would find people are also disappointed about that. And this is an open question for me, how to talk about the middle class as one group when in a European setting, when they're so different per country, and what are the things that they have in common. So migration is one thing, but the other thing would be birth rates, which is also completely different in Europe. And I think, suppose you have a country with a very low birth rate, and you are confronted with the possibility that your population is decreasing by 20% or 25%. I think Bulgaria and Romania are specifically hurt by that. I mean, that's not a nice outlook for anyone, old or young, to have this, to realize that, regardless of what the economy is doing. I think, but So I like what Ludek said. It's not about the economy, but it's about having a vision of the future. What do you live for? When we made this book last year about the middle class, and this year we had another one, I used as a subtitle, Middle Class, the Moral Core of Society. It was a bit ambitious title. What do you mean? But the funny thing is that there was this journalist of a rather right-wing newspaper in the Netherlands, center-right, the Telegraaf, okay. So they interviewed me. I was a bit surprised because they really, they were turned on by this word moral core. They liked that a lot. And they wanted to hear something from me that was obvious about the problem of migration and the problem of asylum seekers, which I noticed during this conversation. So when we talked about other stuff, they were not interested. They wanted to hear about that. It made me think that this idea of having a moral core, having some beliefs, something we believe in, is actually something that people are looking for. And the economy does matter, but this is an important thing. Do we have, let's say, a common goal? Do we have a shared understanding of what's important? And this is how I would see middle class, to use it as a word for that. And now the economy is important. One anecdote is that I have a colleague at the university. She's from Italy, and she told me that she visited a hospital in the Netherlands, and there was a woman with a headscarf behind the counter there, and she was with her sister, and she said, "Well, this is normal here in the Netherlands, but in Italy it might provoke racist reactions, or let's say anti-foreigner reactions, because people would say they are stealing our jobs." So the lesson for her was that maybe some of the problems and racial tensions are also due to the fact that the economy doesn't work. If people would have jobs, these tensions would not be very visible or might not play such a big role. So the economy is, I think, rather important. And that is, of course, an issue in Italy. How do you manage that? And finally, what I thought of is that there are these tensions that we see. So tensions in the ambivalent voters. 60% of Czech voters, what I read from the book, has no trust in political institutions, or not in most political institutions, which is quite worrying if you think about it. It's more than half. I looked up the difference with the ratio of CEO pay relative to the average pay of a worker. Czechia is quite high in that ranking, 110. So a CEO earns on average 110 times the salary or remuneration of the average worker. So that's a thing. That's a big thing. And now my point would be maybe, and I've thought about it before coming here. We usually see this as a problem, like we should solve it or we should reduce these tensions. But maybe we can use them. Any relationship, also the relationship I have at home with my kids and my wife, we have some tensions. And it's not always the best way to just quickly reduce them by just giving in. Sometimes it's good to kind of use them. Like, okay, there are different positions here. Let's try to find out why that is. And if we can find solutions that work for the future. Because some of these tensions with middle class are not because we are taxing in the wrong way, but it's because the world is changing. And just keeping things as they are, for example, just wanting to keep things stable, might not be good if the world changes. You might need change and not stability. And then we might use these tensions that everybody feels to get a better view of what kind of change we need. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because of what all of you said, I'm going to a little bit rearrange what I wanted to ask, because I believe that's something that all of you mentioned. So I would like to address that, all of you. In the 2017 OECD report, it clearly stated that there is an increasing inequality and the gap between the rich and the poor. And it said that, of course, the financial crisis accelerated this entire process. But I mean, that's been something that we've talked about for a long time, even though we did think for quite some time that more relates to the United States than it does to Europe, but it's clearly and Britain, but it clearly shows in continental Europe as well. But there was an important conclusion of this report saying that an increasing number of people believe, and I guess that's a lot connected with the middle class, that merit and effort are actually becoming less important than parental background in terms of not only wealth, but also debt. The accumulated debts of the family that is then being passed on to the children, that it also translates in terms of chances, in terms of good health, which you can and which you cannot afford, education system, which reproduces a particular type of elite, that it also turns to be important in terms of migration, and even in countries where, which also the publication mentions, we do not have a lot of migration, it does translate into more ethnic tension within the minorities. This kind of feeling that your children cannot have life that is as good as yours because, and on top of that now, the climate issue. Do you think that the report would be the case for Europe, as they say, and how is that specific for the, the Slovak and Czech post-communist societies, if we can still call them that?
You want to go first? Ladies first. Ladies first.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, I can try to maybe share some views on this. The views will be also based on IRI research, where we saw that people who are, and that the research was done in Visegrad 4, where a large portion of people, for example, are afraid of that their children's future will be worse than their future. And it was not mainly economically, but also because of the current uncertainties, and which includes, like the global changes, threat of war or conflict, or in between West and or whatever Russia. This was also, it's also boosted by lots of disinformation outlets, which, as we know, but also there was one aspect where we were asking, like, why they believe that the future of their children will be worse. Is, for example, that they said that they are afraid of a collapse of the social security system. So practically that there will be no one to pay their pensions, or there will be no one to contribute to the healthcare because there is because of the demographic decline. And in that point, I was thinking that this is exactly what no one, now we have parties, and we have also on the EU level, I mean, there started a discussion about this, like, what do we do with the demographic decline? Who is actually going to pay the system? But 2 years ago, when we did this research, no one was actually opening this question. And I then realized, like, it's interesting that people do know what is the threat. They can count. They understand the basic economical issues. They know that if we have no children, no one is going to pay for my pension. But no one from the political leaders were actually telling, like, we know about this problem. We know that you are fearing, and we have these and these and this kind of solution. And that's the thing where I think we as an EPP were failing in different countries, and where we can actually kind of move our heads on to think what to offer to these people who know that there are these problems coming, and they feel that no one is paying attention. And they know that, okay, the politicians are not afraid because they have higher salaries, they have some savings, they can have their pension, but what about me? And so this is something, and then a part of it is the injustice in the system, because, as you know, and this is the case in every country, is that regardless of how many children you have, regardless of how you bring up your children, you have the same kind of pension based on your salary. So practically you have a mother of, I don't know, 4 children who stays home, invest in the children have higher education, whatever. And you have another mother who had no children and had a career among the elite companies. She would have 3 times higher pension than the person who actually raise up the children who are contributing to the pension of the other woman. And this is a huge injustice in the system, which we didn't see when we had enough of children. But now this injustice is coming up, and people do see that there is an injustice. So I think we, as an EPP, we have to be more cautious about the injustice in a system, because that's one of the kind of basic value. We want justice. We don't want only social economy. We also want to have a just economy.
Let me start with the fact that after Velvet Revolution we started with the society where basically everyone was, economically speaking, more or less equal. The Gini coefficient was very low, so there is something logical about the differences getting bigger. You know, it's economically unavoidable if you move to really free, the free society, more or less market economy and so on. And this is unavoidable, but it's obviously for some people unpleasant. The problem is that very often those who are performing so well, people have perception that it is not a fair competition. Miriam has said that many people that have benefits at the end of communist regime were those who had the best starting position for transformation to a market economy, and they benefit greatly, like our prime minister. At the same time, you have a lot of corruption. Obviously, corruption is probably everywhere. I guess in those like transforming economy, it was much more because there was more on stake. Law was worse, and the results were more difficult, more visible. And at the same time, the rules everywhere are set to help richer to be richer. You know, another example is our prime minister again with his tax avoidance tax avoidance scheme that help him to save millions of crowns for taxes that otherwise he should pay. So in addition to some certain discomfort of the process when someone is doing much better than you, there is a big feeling of injustice. And this is something that is hurting the economy. This was the same, you know, to some extent in the US after 2008 crisis, Occupy Wall Street, when people said, you know, there are private profit and there are socialized losses, you know. But obviously in our societies, this process was much more stronger. But what's the bad, and this is the fail of the state, that the state should look after the kids. And it seems that social determination of the kids is now very high, and it's growing. So those who are, as you said, from families that are doing well have a better chance to get better education, and through better education get better jobs, and those who are lagging behind keep lagging behind. And this is the problem, because this is basically creating the pockets that are getting more and more closed, and they form not a very positive view about the society. And obviously you cannot expect that those richest who really believe that they are doing so well because they are so great, they don't feel very much loyalty to society. But if people somewhere in the middle start to feel that the society is not fair for them, and this is not their society, this is society of someone else, then this is a very serious problem, and this is a problem that we are to some extent facing.
Thank you. Arjen, is there some common features across the European countries, as you have done a lot of work on comparing them?
Yeah, I think that you see in many countries, I was even surprised by that, even countries that like Bulgaria, which had a very high economic growth, that people were still not very positive about the future. That surprised me. Maybe it's about what you say, that is the impression that to get ahead you need to have the right connections or the right parents. That feels unfair. At the same time, what I thought is that, I mean, this is a really complex problem. This is not easy. We had the Dutch Nobel Prize winner, Tim Mergen, he said you should tax talent. That was his idea for policy. So at birth, when you know you have a lot of talent, you pay higher taxes, something like this. Well, I don't think we want that. Well, I thought, first of all, I think it helps me to think about this as a complex, to call it a complex problem, because this is a time where people look for fast answers. And I mean, I'm not in active politics, but I mean, I understand that politicians and their communication advisors say, well, you should tell them what the problem is, and that is your solution. And what happens then is that if you do not have a solution for something, you don't mention it. So, for example, I'm an economist, so I heard these stories about multinationals not paying their taxes. So I Googled for it, and the only documents I find is from the Green Party, also in Europe, who did this study, like how much, and the Economist or the Financial Times. But EPP parties are more or less silent on it, because we think, yeah, if we start saying that, people think we're going to be anti-business. So you think about solution. Don't mention something if you do not have a solution. Maybe this is a time to talk more about, to raise slow questions in times of fast answers. To say, look, we think this is a problem. What's the answer? Well, I don't know yet. We have to think about it. We're not under communist rule. We're not at war. We don't have to solve it next year, but maybe it's good to think about this and actively do something. Our former party leader was known in the Netherlands for saying that he was worried about climate change because he said it's unaffordable. I don't know. The reactions were mixed. I'm not sure if everything about that was really helpful, but at least the fact that he raised that issue was helpful. That he was saying, look, this is really a question for which I don't have an answer. And then, so I'm really a fan of Václav Havel, who wrote about hope. Hope is something, you must know it, like hope is not believing that it will be all right, but that what you want is actually worth fighting for. But that takes a while, especially if you have no dictatorship or no easy enemy. Maybe we could be the party of thinkers that say we think these are important problems and that's why. We don't have an easy solution yet. So maybe I'm idealistic here, but that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, the question of raising the issue and then opening the debate.
Yep.
I want to come back a little bit later to the social welfare, but I want to come back to what you said about the Czech Prime Minister avoiding paying tax, and then we talked about the middle class being squeezed by the aging population because we need more taxes. So how do you explain then that in the survey it shows very clearly that except for the so-called, what we call the young digital elite or the young liberals, across all the sections of the society, including the middle class and including actually the upper class, his movement has the highest support in the society. So even from the people that are actually being squeezed by the big business, which he actually represents, how is then that possible? Because it seems like contradiction in terms.
If I may, we are living in a special world where some people tend to say that there is no difference between a lie and truth. That lie is just their truth. And this is the problem. This is the problem, Just we don't need to talk about Czech Republic. We can talk about America, where Donald Trump became president because he said that he's anti-elite. He's the one who is clearly one of the clear member of the elites, and it worked. He became president. I guess what we can see in Czech Republic, the success of a prime minister who, according to previous political standard, would hardly be the acceptable as someone in top politics, is that his success was rather failure of the others. Because sometimes happen that the political movements, parties that represent theoretically the good direction and the values and the good principles, they behave the way that they lose the trust. And then there is the problem that I tried to talk at the beginning. Normally, what would be ideal if people have some kind of core value, core principles, and they try to be loyal to them. So I would say, okay, I am center-right voter, but my party really failed so badly, I don't want to see them anymore. But there is someone else that have a different that has a similar political direction, but it's different, so I will vote for them. But unfortunately, we are missing this core. So people can very easily move from dissatisfaction with concrete people and concrete party with rejection of the system and willingness to underwrite to completely different system. For example, a system where it doesn't matter what is the program, it's enough if someone would say, I will handle. You know, so that's the problem. And we were missing this base, or this base that we hoped we start to build in November '89 was just not strong enough. But I would not blame just the people that they somehow have given up this. I guess there was significant contribution of failures of the political parties and the politicians that contribute to this perception that, you know, maybe these values are not so important. Let's call someone who will handle it, and everything will be okay. So it's how I see that.
I would maybe say that the differences in the different countries just depend on who was in power in the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. Because the squeeze of the middle class has happened across the West. So in the US, the Democrats were in power. Obama has practically needed more taxes to pay his social system, to pay the healthcare. The middle class was the victim. In Europe, the same thing. In Slovakia, it actually happened during the Smer party. So now we have the middle class, which is kind of divided across the kind of today opposition, and hope that it's the spectrum of parties which might, hopefully after February, create the coalition. In Czech Republic, the central right somehow was part of the time in power when the squeeze of the middle class happened. So the people have kind of, like, because what we discussed before, that they're no longer so stable in their preferences for stable parties, kind of like classical parties, because they suddenly felt that those parties failed. So they are trying to find solutions somewhere else. And maybe the problem now, why Arno is still in power, or why it looks like that Trump is going to win the elections again, is that they have delivered something. You know, like in the US, the middle class is having more money. They obviously admitted that now there was lots of reforms which helped them to have paid less taxes. There is less administrative burden on the kind of small, medium-sized businesses. So they admit that we feel better. The liberal media is telling them that the situation in their own country is absolutely critical, even though they know that their life is better. So obviously they stick to what delivered, what is Trump. And this is the problem, that some of the populists, they kind of realize where the problem lies, and they made few reforms just to kind of keep these people happier, that they at least see that the trend is better, and then they have their own business, you know, like their own, I don't know, corruptive business as in Czech Republic, or whatever business, what is in Trump's mind. But then, so this is the thing that, my question is, where is the central right in Europe? Because obviously in the US the situation is different. And I really liked what Arjen said, because there was a quote that the populists have asked the right questions, but they have wrong answers. We don't even ask the questions because we have no answers. And I really like what you said, that we at least should start to talk about the problems, because the people we will regain the trust. If we are, and this is also the change of the politics. I think, I don't know, 30 years ago, no politician will ever admit that I don't have an answer. I think now people would appreciate if you say, I do see this problem, but the problem is so complex. I don't want to tell you an answer immediately because we really have to think. Everything is so interconnected. And I think if we would at least start to open up the issues and offer these issues, invite the middle class to create the answers together with us, that's the kind of approach of the central right politics, which will probably help us to regain trust and kind of regain our ex-electorate, which we have lost. So, and that's kind of a partially answer to your question as well.
And just one quick remark, how do you then make sure that you don't end up being a populist? Because when you say you invite them, some people can mistake that for whatever they think is the solution, we will repeat.
Because the populists they don't invite people to discuss. They offer solutions, which are obviously failing. And I think the middle class, as we said, are people who are better educated. I think they can see the difference. But if they don't see an opportunity to vote someone who recognizes his or her problems, then they vote for parties as we mentioned. But if they would see at least the genuine effort from our parties to look into the solutions, seek the solutions, I think they would know the difference between our answers, or at least half answers, or honesty of seeking the answers, and the populist answers, which obviously cannot function and can only create a better cows or higher cows in the country. I mean, I know that it sounds idealistic, but I think that's the only way how we can start. I mean, obviously, we have to stick to our values. We cannot fall into the populist trap, and probably in a short term it won't work, but in a long term, I think that's the only way how we can. I mean, it's the faithfulness to the values, but not blindness to the problems, I would say, maybe.
And that's very nicely put.
May I just two remarks? The first, I guess economically speaking, due to very good performance of EU economies, our two countries have built something that is economically speaking middle class, but the people maybe sometimes don't recognize it. And not surprised if in Prague the flat is more expensive than in Vienna, and the income of people is still very far away from income from Vienna. People don't feel that they are the middle class, but economically speaking, we are I guess quite progressing. And the second remark, maybe reaction, just to that idea that we should ask the question and admit that we don't have the answers. The problem, a little bit of problem with this strategy is that there are people that quickly will come with the answer. And you will look like a loser, because people like Trump, Nigel Farage, they are immediately finished with the answer because they know everything, and because their electorate doesn't care if it's true or not, they will have some profits. And for example, in the migration crisis in the Czech Republic, the real problem was that maybe people talk about the problem, but the mainstream politicians have no answer. But unfortunately, extremists immediately step on the stage and said, "We have the answer," and then they lead the society, and then the others were following. So one should be careful about it, because if we are all gentlemen's club, then it's a good strategy, because this is a difficult question. There is not answer. The other admit that there is not a simple answer. So the discussion will just gradually evolve. But with these guys that don't care about the truth, about the fact, it's a complicated strategy. And last, going back to previous, we have to some extent, economical middle class. But these people have very different opinion. They are far from being homogeneous. I can see that even in my bubble, or bubble that is close to my bubble, probably the most interesting issue now is climate. Within this bubble, you will find the people that are very concerned, and some people that are very concerned if we try to do even anything, even something, So, and they are maybe, according to some criteria, they can be with this bubble, and it's quite difficult to address both of them at the same time.
Definitely true. I will now ask the audience if they have any questions for the speakers. Do you want to answer the questions individually? Do you want to collect a few answers?
You are the boss.
So let's just take the 3 questions, and then there was here, and here, and then we'll answer, and then we'll do it again.
Thank you very much. My name is Jolana Mungengova. I come also from the Czech Republic. I work for the European Commission in the cabinet of the EU Trade Commissioner, but here I will speak on my personal behalf. I will start by a quick comment, because it seems to me that today people define themselves as members of the middle class, not only in terms of national references or EU-level references, but also worldwide references, because we live in a globalized world. The world is open through mass media, through social media. We see that there are also middle-class members outside of the EU, sometimes our friends, our trade partners, etc. So when we speak about that concept, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a global dimension that is adding itself to what we used to call middle class before. In terms of a question for you, how would you think, European People's Parties, because they were on the agenda also in the previous panel, should address the concerns raised by middle class using either pure representative democracy tools or also direct democracy tools. Because I think this is also what the people who are members of the middle class are calling for. We don't want politicians to give us a solution, an answer. We want a proposal and an invitation to participate in shaping that proposal further. So we are not looking for a golden cow that will deliver, you know, a new message from heaven. We want the ability to freely, together with others, participate, because we have a voice, we are educated enough, we are paying taxes, so we want to have our own chance to matter in the global discourse. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, gentleman.
My name is Michal Boni. I'm the former member of European Parliament from Poland, so some common experiences from 1989. Thank you very much for inspiring discussion. 2 points. Firstly, if we want to go ahead, I think that we need to change our mind about politics. Because it's very important not to be under the pressure of hashtag politics and tyranny of simplification. It's what populists are doing and giving to the societies. We need to come back in the new modern way to evidence-based policies and evidence-based politics. And also I fully agree, treating as some kind of evidence the knowledge done by citizens. Citizens are the source, is the source of the knowledge for authorities, for politicians, for politics. So it requires, of course, changes, and of course it's crucial, but it should be connected, it should be combined with the long-term strategies and long-term view on some issues. There is no possibility to discuss about future of our children, future of our grandchildren and grand-grandchildren when we are talking about demography and pension systems without long-term view, and it requires the special understanding of the politics, yes? Much more brave decisions done by politicians. And the second point is related to the classical view on middle class. In Poland, we have discussed about it through many years, and it was clear that, first of all, we need to create the proper framework for business development. But I feel from this discussion, and I think it's crucial to understand that this is not only business, this is not only work, this is quality of life, this is well-being, and we need to be much more open for the new model of public services. Public services, which means healthcare area and accessibility of new models of healthcare area using new technologies. This is education in the new style, and so on and so on. So what do you think about the possibility done by EPP, for example, to come back to the politics and policies done, based on evidence and with perspective focused on the long future, and how we can cooperate to consider what is how important for the middle class is the area of public services and what we can do from national level and from European level.
Thank you. And there was one more question here. We'll come back for the next round.
Thank you. My name is Günther Martis. I'm an independent transport advisor, specifically for air transport, but for also technology developments. And I was very interestingly listening to all this, and I heard at least 2 MEPs with a very honest opinion. Thank you very much. That was a little bit refreshing. I would say I concur totally with your views. My question would be, we have heard a lot of demographic changes and changes in the past, But the topic of this panel is basically how to manage the change, and the change ahead of us is huge influence of automation. So the middle class will change completely over the next 10 years. And what we call middle class will probably be completely evaporated. It will be consumed. Even doctors, lawyers, bankers, everything will be basically automated. So my children, for example, they even refuse, and they are now over 20, to learn the driver's license because they say, listen, in 10 years we have autonomous cars. I don't waste time for a driver's license. I don't buy a car. Father, you have 2 cars, you can sell them. This is completely stupid. Give them away. So we have a drastic change ahead, and these changes need to be addressed now with the technology, with the R&D, with the support, with the social background. And I'm sorry, I don't hear that. And specifically, the center-right parties seem much more to support the big entrepreneurs, the big companies, instead of the, let's say, simple individual coming out of the middle class and probably in the future being much lower than the middle class. What is their answer? Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I start?
Sure, sure.
So the first question was about direct democracy. I think that's a good point, is to see how you can involve citizens in things, especially hard problems, maybe climate change, some things like that. I don't know if like referenda and stuff helps, because that also like backfires sometimes, because extreme positions are easily magnified. But I think that's a very, very good idea, especially if the problem is complex and involves everyone, also in their beliefs. Now, when you talk about beliefs, the other question was about evidence-based policy making, and I thought, well, there's an issue where, as a Christian Democrat, I think evidence-based is sometimes lacking in what it can do, because you also need to believe in something. I mean, you cannot read a scientific paper to find out how you should live your life. But if you say it like, use the knowledge of citizens, I completely agree with you. Maybe that would be my point with also this thing about the risks that the middle class would evaporate. Maybe we're asking too much from politics. I think the Christian democratic view is usually society doesn't start with politics. It starts in society itself, the families and firms. And then we have the government that needs to do stuff, but that's where it starts. So if we see the risks of automation and robots, it's not that we have to do something. It's just that the government shouldn't stand in the way. Maybe let some stuff happen. Maybe things will get worse, but let's first see how it plays out. Because if families and firms, they're much more capable of adapting. And then, because if you think about automation, a lot of stuff is already automated. If I think about the Netherlands, there's so much technology and robots, also in agriculture, and still unemployment is really low. So you would expect to see high unemployment, but you don't see that. And there's even a correlation between robotics investment and employment, which seems to be a positive correlation. So I'm not sure if it leads to an evaporation, but I think that that's my final point. When you point to big companies, well, that's the thing. That's where you see policy, competition policy, impacting small businesses. Like, suppose I want to start a social media network. I mean, I could, isn't it? I won't do it, because I know there's Facebook already. And Facebook will make sure that I don't become their real competitor. And that's a real issue, I think, where even the EU can have an impact on people's lives just by making sure that competition is free. And then, if competition is free, we have entrepreneurship. I think we will feel our way into the future. I'm optimistic. Okay.
Yes, thank you for very interesting questions, which make me more to think rather than I don't have an answer, but I can try to kind of maybe share my way of thinking. To the first question of direct or representative democracy, I think the problem is for central right is that we have somehow lost the NGO sector or the civil society sector, which looks like now it's a kind of a result of a progressive left, that this is they are the ones who created the NGOs, and in many countries we see that the EPP members are even fighting against the NGOs because they say like they are all progressive. For me as a Christian, I think that this is the kind of core translation of the Christian values into the society, the subsidiarity principle, make the politics closest as possible, closest to the people. That comes from the social teaching of the church. And we have completely given up on that. We kind of behave as if it was something strange, although it's the core thing we brought as a Christian Democrats into the society. So I think we should renew that. We should kind of change our attitude. Of course, there is lots of progressive liberals who are our enemies and who are kind of stealing our younger generations politically. But if we will be distinguishing ourselves from it, then we will be losing and we will never reverse the course. So I think we should embrace it and really help the civil society to be stronger, because naturally a big share of it will help us to reshape the politics and answer the questions, as we talked before. We need to kind of to look for the answers together with the society. So thank you for reminding this, because I think this is something which is very important in order to answer all the challenges we are facing. To Mr. Boni's question, I don't have an answer, but I'm just kind of having a couple of thoughts where we can start. First of all, we should start to make the public services more just, as I mentioned before. We should think where are the kind of things which are not really just, and make it more just, that the people, our electorate, feels that they're not losing, that they're not squeezed to finance something which is inefficient or not even supporting someone. And this is related also to look into the efficiency of those public services. This is again coming from our system. Yes, we will have less money in healthcare because we will have less people to pay for it and more older people who would need the services. But on the other hand, if we will first of all make it less corrupted, which is the problem in Slovakia. Not every country, but every country to a certain extent, there is a corruption, direct or indirect, or corruption which means that it serves certain interests but not the interests of the patient. So this is the core value we always had, justice and clear, transparent economy. Make it based on a basis of this, that it's economically efficient. The services will be economically efficient. That means that with less money we can serve more people. And this comes also together with the automatization. Yes, on one hand it's a danger. On the other hand, this clearly can make healthcare, for example, cheaper. So we need to combine these two, which is a risk for our electorate, and relate it with something which we can offer to society in a way as a solution. Obviously, we have to play it wisely, but we need to smooth the transition in between these two stages, and we have to be very clever how to do it. But I think we can use this challenge translate it into an opportunity for making the public services cheaper and more efficient. And on the EU level, because you were asking, I would, as a conservative, I would keep the social services under the auspices of the member states. But on the other hand, the EU, where the EU can contribute, is with research, because the member states cannot afford it. But obviously, this is something what the EU has a clear position, and we should make a pressure that the EU is taking advantage of its capacity to make research and help the member states in healthcare and services provided. So, and the last question with the automatization, practically I answered it a little bit, that we need to, first of all, make from the challenge an opportunity, because I think this is clearly where we can, as central right, we can use this opportunity and provide something to our electorate. And also what Arjen mentioned, that in this automatization and the whole IT sector, what is a problem which is against our values is the big corporations who are away from any system, and we are silent about. I think Facebook should not be one. We should really make sure that these companies play along the rules which are for other companies, and that will help more, because now, I mean, who is going to establish a social network? I mean, you can't, because you will be bought off immediately, or if you are successful and you cannot withstand the pressure, or you will not be successful because practically the competition is too high, because there is a injustice in the market. So I think this is something we need to make the IT market more, or digital market more transparent and more open, and that will help the middle class to take advantage of it and use it into kind of creating more businesses.
Okay, I will try to address a few things, but maybe I will start with slight disagreement. Just a few minutes ago we said that some challenges in these days, in this world, in society, are very complex, that even we, with the time to solve the issues, with a bunch of experts around us, access to all know-how, we don't know the answer. At this moment, turn to direct democracy doesn't seem to me be a very smart solution, because if even we are not able to formulate the question, we don't know by at all the answer, what are the options, then I guess direct democracy doesn't work. And the more complex the issues are, more dangerous is it. Then we can go basically for random work. So and I guess the participation is something very different than direct democracy. I guess we need the participation of people. We need that they take the ownership of the decision, but it's not going through direct democracy in my terms, in my view. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, but if we turn to people and say, okay, so we don't know, tell us what to do. Tell us what to do with climate change. Tell us what to do with Brexit. Tell us, that's not the way how to do it. I guess the key is, I believe the representative democracy is better, and I'm not a mathematician, so I'm not the authority in that. But I guess you need two components to make it work. The first is the competence, evidence-based policy, competence, and the second is trust. And you need both of this. And they are self-enforcing. Obviously, if you gain the trust, and people let you to make the decision, you do the decision competent way, you gain more trust. But obviously the problem is if you are starting with too low trust. If you have too low trust, even if you make some competent decision, people will not be able to trust. Because we are living in such a complex world that the decision is not just the black and white. It's not delivering immediately the result. So perception is very often much more function of trust than actually a result of concrete decision. On services, on one hand, obviously, central right should be very careful about the money, and we know that spiral up with taxation doesn't work. But I must say, to my dissatisfaction, I don't see people very much to complain that we have too many roads or too many highways. I don't see people to complain that we have too many doctors. And I'm talking about our electorate. So we must be careful about it. I guess the future is not about providing less services or to deteriorate in quality, but the charm is providing high quality of services for good money, that people will accept the price they pay for that. And last, to your question, I'm here a little bit more optimistic, I would say, because I don't think that this is a revolution. I guess this is the evolution, and this is the evolution where we are part of that already. If you look at last 20 years at some sectors, for example, I don't know, consumer electronics, medical, automotive, the changes were very substantial, and we were able to deal with that. And I guess it will continue like that. Economically speaking, there is some kind of balance, because if you in one sector move very quickly, you replace labor with the capital, then you will have a little bit too much of labor, the wages will go a little bit down, and the other sector will use this labor and produce something. But speaking in longer horizon, we are facing, I guess, big shift from the employment in industry to more employment in services. Because in many parts of the services, for example, services associated to aging of population, for example, as one example, there will be big demand, and important is to have such an economic system that people will have money to buy the services. Just to give you an example, I give up standing at the queue for coffee here, And because I can afford it, if we finish on time, I will go to cars makers and will buy the real coffee from real person. It would cost me €3, but I will get what I want. So the machine actually is not competitive enough for me immediately now. Despite of all this development, maybe it's German machine, maybe it's good machine, but overall setup was not good enough, so I will actually turn to service economy, and in cars makers there is all the time 4 people running around. So I'm not hopeless, but the key is good education, more universal education. This is essential. The second, functioning labor market. Really accept what is, I guess, the biggest challenge for responsible politicians, to make one very negative reply to people, because people are asking for trust and the stability. And basically the stability. Stability is gone. Everything is changing. So people must expect that there is not a stability. The job that you will get in the age of 20 will not be there at the age of 30. In the age of 30 to 40, everything will be changing. So we must say, okay, we need more flexibility of the labor market, but it doesn't mean that you will suffer, because there will be different systems, there will be requalification, and so the second component. The third, flexible economy. It's very important. We should not fight the wars of the previous century. Don't try to save the champions of past. Don't try to conserve big companies. Flexibility and competition sometimes works much more better. And to make it work, we need someone like Margaret Vestager, because it's very important to have good rules for the competition, to not be subject to unfair state aid of your competitors, things like that. So I guess if we make it function, we will handle this transformation that will be going on. And I firmly believe this is not revolution, this is evolution.
Thank you. There was one more question.
Thank you very much. Is it working? Yeah. My name is Jan Czarnocki. I'm from Poland. I'm EPP trainee in EPP group, but I'm speaking on my behalf. I would consider myself as an advocate for our generation. So we are speaking about middle class, but actually from perspective of someone who is 25 years old, getting to the middle class it's hard. You either go higher middle class rich, or you lost in a rat race. So do politicians also think about it? Because we feel huge burden. We have climate change. We'll be paying for your pension funds. And we feel overwhelmed as a generation. No problem, sir. And I'm thinking whether politicians are thinking about it, because whenever I'm speaking with people 40s, 50s, 60s, I think they are not really thinking about problems of youth in a serious way. They're like, oh, you have so much opportunities. Oh, when I was in your age, I was like, we have communism in Poland and stuff. All right, yes, but you establish your business, you build a house, and meantime, you have family and you're 30. When I'll be 30, I don't know where I'll be. I'm sure we won't be building my house. I'll be working 12 or 13 hours. So I would like to ask you about, like, how about middle class for youth? So like good public services, good universities, and it takes to tax rich people to make it. I don't see any other way, or maybe you have some other ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Thomas Brandner. I'm working for the General Secretariat of the Council. Just one small remark and one question. First, a remark. Please be aware of the enormous good the center-right political forces are doing every day for the middle class. I can say it from experience. If you were not there in the European Parliament, the S&D colleagues would regulate everything that moves until the point where nothing moves anymore. So many, many thanks to you, and please keep on fighting. The second thing is a question. I don't know whether this is a problem in Slovakia or the Czech Republic. In Austria, it is a big problem that in the social bargaining process, we have settled for a very low pension and unsatisfactory pension regime for independents and small entrepreneurs. And this is in Austria, this is a very serious source of discontent, for these people who have worked their whole life and have been productive, creative, flexible, risk-taking and so on, and then in the end, when they are retiring on a really lousy pension. And not everybody has been so successful that they can live from their millions of savings. Is this something that might be an interesting avenue in the political dialogue in your countries?
Thank you. Do you want to react? Generation conflict within the middle class, or
Maybe I can try the first question on this. So, I do have a son who's 19, so I can feel a bit of that as well. I think what happens is that there's this wonderful book by a humane economy, one of the ordo-liberal thinkers, German thinkers, who writes about competition as the principle that orders the economy. But what he means is not that we all compete with each other, but that for firms that they can compete with each other. And he writes even about the communist economy, where there's competition. Inside one factory there was competition, but he shows that, well, that's not the thing that we mean. We mean that there's honest competition between firms. And I think what's happened is that, as I see it in the Netherlands, there is some, I would call it social liberal thinking, that everybody should compete everywhere. Like students to get to the university, we open the market for housing, we let the market solve that problem, and now we find out that it doesn't work. I think it's maybe, especially in housing, it's a terrible situation, where we should just see that there is a role for the state, because we say you cannot build everywhere, especially in the Netherlands, it's pretty strict. So it's just impossible to say let the market solve it. So that's where I think we need to make we can move forward by saying let's have honest competition for firms and let the state do its work where it needs to do the work. Especially housing, I think, is an issue in cities, which would take away a lot of issues where young people are worried about.
To the question on young people, you are right that I think there is not enough of thinking about where we are heading in terms of what the young people are going to receive. On the other hand, I think we have to be more careful about these radical revolutionary solutions young people are often asking for. And I think this is exactly the opportunity for the central right to not kind of fall into the traps that like, oh, we have to all stop breathing because breathing is not ecological. We produce CO2. I mean, this is kind of extreme. And if we will fall into this trap, I mean, the revolutionary approach is it creates chaos and never works. Of course, we have to, and I think the whole debate here was about exactly how to make the world better and what would help the young people to not to kind of have all the burden of the social system on their shoulders, and not to like have the whole burden of the destroyed world, the health and ecological ecosystem in our world. So we need to find solutions. But obviously, it's also difficult to imagine in what world you are going to live in 10, 15 years. We don't know, because it's kind of everything develops so fast that we cannot take everything in account and say like, okay, the people who are 25 now, if they're 35 or 40, the world will look like this. So we have to create a solution for that, because we don't want them to suffer. So I think this is something we need to try to make things better, but not fall into the trap of a revolution. And here I would say that it's also the responsibility of the young people to not to fall into the trap of requesting the revolutionary changes, because we don't believe, and from the experience in the world and historical experience, we know that it never pays off. And to the pension system, the problem and maybe Ludek can definitely, with his economic background, contribute more, but the problem in the post-communist countries is that the whole pension system is totally unjust, absolutely totally unjust, and the society somehow, I mean, the pensioners somehow kind of adopted to that because they can't change it. I mean, first of all, it relates to your income. So people who, during the communist times, cannot have high not high-paid jobs, they are not high-paid, but at least a little bit higher-paid jobs, they have the smallest, because of the regime, because they were against the regime, they have the small income. The people with the smallest pension in our countries are those who were in prison during the communist times, because they had no income, means that they have no pension. They receive like 200 euros as a pension. You can't even survive from that money. And these are the people who were the victims of the regime. So there is so much injustice that to even open the question how to, you know, like how to make the system just is already a big ticking bomb. But yes, I mean, this is in terms of Austrian politics. I mean, now maybe after these elections there is an opportunity to change this, because obviously, I mean, Sebastian Kurz is trying to kind of, by what we said before, like talking about the problems of the middle class, of the society, which not many EPP politicians do, and trying not to offer very populist solutions, sometimes populist, I must admit, but I think this is exactly what we need to make sure that our politicians deliver for the people who vote for them, because this was for many, many years exactly the kind of trap for the Christian Democrats of central right, that we were trying to deliver to the poorest, but then we took from our electorate, and this is where we ended up.
Can I ask for a very quick reaction, because Arjen has another panel.
Yeah, I will try to be quick. I guess the first what I would like to provide my kids and or you, my kids are younger, to you is first of all the possibility to make a choice and the fair opportunities. And this is, I guess, very important, because this is how the society should work. It's up to you, but the chances should be fair. I guess must should be really look at the taxes, and this bias towards the rich is I guess, very wrong. I would go in taxation for less taxing the labor and more taxing the other things, but not the Polish way, but fair way. I sometimes believe that what's important that we that are in power, we address the current changes on time, and not to just be silent and leave it up to you. I'm here talking, for example, about climate policy, for example, but not the only one. This is the same for the pension. So address things on time, not leave it for the later. I sometimes believe that to use more economy, to use more rational solutions, it's better social policy than so-called social policy. So I guess the rationality would help. And last not least, and Miriam, you said it, you should help us. You should participate more, because it's also your future. So and also set your demands. What do you want? Try to formulate it. Try to think about it. Obviously, not demand something that doesn't work, and try to address people like me, like you are too young, maybe, and ask what you want to see from us, and maybe we will talk with you and to say if it makes sense in our view or not. The pension is just three quick questions. First of all, it's a national. Each country is different. The second, pension system is very often very closely linked to tax system, because tax system is providing the funds for the pensions. But most important, what is, I guess, killing the pension system is over-politicization. I guess sometimes it seems to me that pension funds is biggest source of advertisement cost campaigns for the governments, by deciding against any kind of system, against any kind of sustainability, to increase the pensions before elections or in the meantime if they are in trouble. It should be depoliticized. And this is the matter of responsibility. So there is not space for politics. There should be clear rules. The rules should be observed, and the same. Your generation should have a feeling that the system is fair. Talking about the small, mediums, small self-employed people, the same problem is Austria. That is actually based on the fact that these people have extremely low taxation, and because the pension is linked to payments to the system, this is the outcome, and this is outcome that is socially suboptimal, I must say.
Okay, thank you, because our time is up. I would like to thank our speakers for coming here and sharing their opinions with us. Thank you all for coming here, and have a nice day. Thank you.